everybody, and welcome to the Olympia Symphony Thursday night live streams of concerts scheduled for June. There's 3 of them. This is the first one. I am Dr. Kristen Woodward, and I am here today to introduce you to my favorite instrument, the horn. Now, you'll notice I didn't say the French horn. Yes, it is known as the French horn, but most other countries in the world, the European countries and whatnot, call it cor or corno or just the horn. So in 1971, at the first gathering of the International Horn Society at Florida State University, my alma mater, the society said, in English-speaking countries, we would like it to be known as just the horn. So when I say I play the horn, this is the one that I mean. So today, my goal with this broadcast is to give you a little introduction to the history of the horn, a really brief outline of how it became the instrument that we play today, and to answer some of those burning questions that you might have about the horn. Why do I put my hand in the bell? Why does the bell face backwards? That seems counterintuitive. Also, why do horn players miss notes? So those are some questions that I'll get to and answer through going through the history of the instrument. So I do have the chat open on my computer over here. So if you are interested at all in asking questions, I encourage you to do that. Say hi to me in the comments. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you have to say about my instrument. I'll be also doing some playing as well. I'll be playing some Beethoven, some Mozart, and some Strauss. But other than that, I'm here for you and to answer some questions about the horn that you may have and to make some beautiful music. So once again, welcome to our Thursday night concert. Again, I am Kristen Woodward. I'm the 3rd horn in the Olympia Symphony. And I want to thank the Olympia Symphony for giving us the opportunity to do this. So, shall we begin with the history of the horn? The very best place to start, of course, is the beginning. So if we go back to ancient prehistoric history, we're going to see a horn that looks like this, made out of actual animal horns, hence the name horn. And these were used as signaling devices for communicating across battlefields, for communicating in the woods when you're hunting per se, and they were very simple. You may also have seen conch shells, same kind of purpose, used for signaling and making loud noise to let people know what's happening. Of course, as time progressed and we move on to the Bronze Age, and people get a little more updated with the type of metal that they can use. They don't have to use animal horns anymore. So by the 6th century, we actually had evidence of people creating signaling devices similar to animal horns out of metal. I want you to think about when a queen enters a room and there's a big long trumpet with a banner off of it. Those are called herald trumpets, and that is one of those evolutions of a signaling animal horn into an actual instrument. That was, moving into the Bronze Age. By the time we get to the 17th century, we started using more metals and things, and Europeans began experimenting with using the horn for hunting and using it as a signaling device there. This was extremely popular in France. So now we know where we get maybe the French idea of the French horn. In France, hunting and hunting horns are really synonymous. And again, I have some low-tech and some high-tech things here. So here's my low-tech visual aid. This is what we call a hunting horn, a corno de caccia, a horn of the chase. And you can see how the horn went from being a straight long tube, like you think of with those herald instruments and with instrument horns, to being curled. This was so it was easier for the riders to hold the instrument while they were riding. So one of the mysteries of the horn solved, why does the bell face backwards? It was easier to carry. One of the many reasons, of course, but being easier to carry, of course, helps a lot too. So how did we go from the horn being used as a signaling device outside and being used on hunts to something that we use in a concert hall? Well, the journey took a little longer, but by 1639, opera composer named Cavalli wanted to make a big production, and he wanted a hunting scene. The best way to musically show a hunting scene was to use a horn. So what he did was he brought horn players on the stage, hunting horn players, and they played a hunting call. And everyone's like, oh, well, this is an interesting instrument. Maybe we could get this to fit into an orchestra. So at around the same time, we had the hunting horns kind of making an appearance in operas, and definitely around France. Around the same time in the 1650s, there was a count by the name of Antonin von Spurk, an Austrian nobleman, and he traveled to France and heard the horn, the hunting horn, the corne de cacha, horn of the chase, and he loved it. So when he went back to Germany, he demanded that his brass players learn this instrument. So we have the horn spreading from the hunting fields of France to the opera stages in Italy, and now in the Bohemian region into the German region, where we actually have a really big school of horn playing that came out of there. So by the 1680s, the horn really started to appear in the orchestra and in Count Spurk's court. He also is said to have been the influence for Bach to actually put the horn in his Mass in B minor, if you've ever heard the Mass. So by the 1650s, 1680s, here we are. We've got the horn in Germany and France and in Italy. Going into the 17th century, we really started to try to put the horn into the instrument. Again, as technology advances, as the horn advances, we can use it for more things. So what they did was they made the horn into this. This is what we call a natural horn. You'll notice it's missing a whole middle section of tubing that I have in mine. This instrument has no valves. But this was the compromise they came up with to play it into the orchestra. It's going to have a less visceral sound, a less raucous sound. It's going to be rounder. It's going to be a little bit darker. But you notice that this horn is kind of limited. It doesn't have any valves. How am I going to get the notes out? Well, I can mimic that horn by playing this one without playing any valves. So if I play... that was called the harmonic series, and those are the notes that are available to me on the instrument without using any valves. For those of you who are musicians, I actually have a picture of our harmonic scale right here. There's notes that go even further than that: A, B flat, B natural, and a C above that, G. But those are the only notes available to horn players if they don't use their valves. So the natural horn only has a certain amount of notes. I can't play a scale for, say. In those two octaves, those are the only notes I have. So the horn is a bit limited. However, again, with people being innovative, new technologies coming around, we found ways around that. And this is going to get to answering that question about why do we put our hand in the bow? So around 1750s, 1770s, a man named Anton Hampel discovered that you can make all the pitches in a scale by manipulating your hand in the bow. So here I have a natural horn. Like I said, I can't play the scale. That sounds nothing like Do, Re, Mi that Julie Andrews sang. So I can mimic a scale, make a scale by manipulating my hand in the horn. So I'm going to try to show you and play a C major scale, my C major scale for you. So you saw that there was times when I had my hand fully closed, half closed, partially closed, so I can get all those notes in the scale. That was Hampel, the hand technique, and this became the standard for horn playing for almost 100, 150 years of horn playing. And it It's hard. It's not an easy thing to learn. I know a lot of people specialize in natural horn. I really recommend listening to Lowell Greer's recordings of natural horn if you want to hear some great natural horn. I'm not a great natural horn player, but I'm doing my best just to demonstrate to you what a natural horn would be like. I also have 2 examples of pieces written during that time period for natural horn that I'm going to play for you now. So the first example I'm going to play for you is Beethoven, and I'm going to do it 2 ways. Sorry, I'm getting my notes straightened out. I'm going to do it for you 2 ways. I'm going to play the opening of the Beethoven Sonata for you using what would have been a natural horn. So I'm going to not use my valves. And then I'll play the whole exposition of the sonata, the first movement of the sonata for you, using my valves and with an accompaniment so you can hear it. But I want you to hear both ways how important it was for the composers to understand how the natural horn and how hand stopping worked in order to really compose effectively for that medium. So here's a Beethoven sonata, and I'm going to play it as if I'm playing on a natural horn with no valves. I'm also going to go a lot slower so I can get all the notes right. I hope you heard that in there where when he went to the chromatic note in the melody, it was a stopped note to really give it some extra emphasis. I'm going to play that first line again, and I want you to listen for that. So with the natural horn, when composers were writing, they had to be really cognizant, really understand that certain notes were going to speak in different ways and going to sound differently. And Beethoven really did a great job of exploiting that in this sonata. Also, another composer who did similar things for the natural horn was Mozart. And I'll play Mozart after Beethoven, Beethoven first. So I'm going to play the sonata for you, the exposition of the first movement. This piece was written in 1800. It's opus 17, so it's super early Beethoven. And it's rumored that he wrote it the night before the performance. I don't know how true that is. But there is a record of an audience member saying, I don't know about this Beethoven piece, but that Giovanni Punto is a great horn player. Everyone knows Punto. So at the time, the horn player was more famous than Beethoven. You probably don't know Punto's name, but you probably do know Beethoven's name now, so either way. This is a lovely sonata written by Beethoven, originally played by Giovanni Punto, very famous horn player back in the day. I don't have a concert pianist roommate, so I'm going to be playing with a backing track. You should be hearing it at the same time as I'm playing. It's not as great as playing with a live musician, but I'll take what I can get. So here I go. I'm going to play the exposition of the sonata of Beethoven's sonata. Thanks for the comments, everyone, as I'm getting this ready here. Oh my gosh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Steph and Jason and Jennifer. Hello to everyone at HS. So I'm going to get to playing though, but I'll look through some of those comments as we go. So here's the exposition of Beethoven's sonata. So that was the Exposition of Beethoven's Sonata, written in 1800, Opus 17, very early Beethoven. So another composer, like I said, that really wrote for the natural horn is Mozart. And Mozart wrote 4 concertos for the horn. He did not write that many for other instruments, so maybe he liked us the best. But either way, Mozart wrote 4 horn concertos in the 1780s, and so he used this hand horn technique extensively. And the person he wrote it for, Joseph Lütke, was an extremely skilled player. The concertos have lots of really high register playing, lots of fast technical passages that you'd have to manipulate with your horn, with your hand, which would be really, really difficult. And lip trills and other really great things. These are standard repertoire for horn players today still. So we talked about the natural horn and how Beethoven wrote for it, Mozart wrote for it. But what if it wasn't written in F? Beethoven's Sonata was written in F. I have my horn in F, everything worked out okay. Now the Mozart selection I'm going to play is for horn in E flat. So what originally had to happen, because there was no valves here, this is a horn that only has one length of tubing, so I can only get one harmonic series out of it. Either you'd have to have multiple horns that are different lengths in order to get the right key, which is really cumbersome and frankly expensive, or we can innovate once again and we can introduce the use of crooks. So what the people who made this horn did was they made a detachable section, here at the beginning, so you can take this out of the horn and then you can insert a different length of tubing to change the key of the instrument. Pretty cool. It's still a bit cumbersome to carry around because you have to carry around, depending on what piece you're playing, you might have to play in 5 different keys and have to have 5 different crooks, but this is a much better solution than having a bunch of multiple instruments that you'd have to carry around. So I'm going to play Mozart for you, and I'm going to play the second movement of Mozart's Third Concerto, really nice, slow, beautiful movement. And this would have been played on this instrument with the E-flat crook, and I'm not sure which one of these it is, but it would be probably a little longer one for E-flat. Maybe this one. Speculating. So either way, this would be horn in E-flat. And Mozart's Third Horn Concerto, the second movement, a slow movement. Some of you might recognize this. Apparently they've used this in commercials, which is kind of fun. But it's really lovely music. So, Third Concerto, second movement. There's Mozart's second movement from his third concerto. No Strauss yet. Just a minute. We'll get there. So we had talked about the horn and how composers like Beethoven and Mozart wrote mostly exclusively, for the natural horn, because that was what the technology that was available at the time. Moving on, of course, as technology moves on, people want to grow the instrument, so they began experimenting. So in the 1800s, people began, instead of carrying crooks around, they wanted everything available right on the instrument. They started trying to add valves to the natural horn, and one of the first types of valves they tried to use was called a piston valve. So if you've seen a trumpet and you push down on the trumpet valves, they are called piston valves. They go up and down. And they still use horns like that in Vienna. They're called Vienna horns, and they have piston valves. But what became most popularized was the rotary valve, invented by Joseph Riedel in Vienna. He and Krushby were working on a horn, and they invented the rotary valve, which is what we have here. So when I push this button down, a case inside of here, where the valve is, it rotates instead of goes up and down. When it rotates, it lets air into one of my different tubes and paths through the horn. So once they developed this technique, it became possible to put the full chromatic scale into the horn, just like this. So when I push down these buttons, I'm letting air move through a different tube. So as we know, when I play without any valves, I get that particular set of notes. If I add a little length to the horn, I'm going to add this middle one here, this smaller tube here, this length here, and it's going to go down a half step. And if I add my first valve, just play my first valve, I'm going to add this length of tubing here to make it go even lower. So that is how the valves work. They make my horn longer so I can change what the bass key in the harmonic series is, the bass note. So having the valves allowed composers to go and really exploit the horn and its beautiful tone and its ability to play both low and high. And one of the composers that went above and beyond in really showcasing the horn with what it's capable of doing is Richard Strauss. Richard Strauss was the son of Franz Strauss, who was an extremely talented horn player in Germany in the 1800s, the 1850s to 1880s. So this notice is 100 years later from when Mozart was writing his concertos for the natural horn. So there's 100 years before Strauss and the valved horn were kind of coming into being. So, but any horn players by that time had really perfected the hand horn techniques, and Franz Strauss was one of them. But he was still experimenting between hand horn and valved horn. So Strauss comes along, he's 18 years old, he hears his dad practicing all the time, and he writes a concerto for it, for the horn, at 18 years of age. Can you imagine being 18 and being like, here dad, you're a professional horn player, I wrote you this concerto. It's just such a wonderful story, I love it. So Richard Strauss wrote this concerto at 18 years old. He wrote it for his father, Franz Strauss, to play. It's rumored that Franz Strauss tried to play it on the natural horn, but he found it difficult or a little treacherous to try to play the high B flats on just the F natural horn, so he ended up playing it on a valved horn. Could be rumors, could be true. Yeah, maybe we'll do some research afterwards, but I've heard that that's the story. But like I said, Richard Strauss really took the horn really to the next level of what it's capable of with valves. He has heroic moments at the beginning. The opening is just this big heroic call, here I am. And then he has these sweeping melodies that are just lovely. He gives you intensity with articulations and fast fingers, going from the high range of the horn to the low. Strauss really knew how to write. And his tone poems also reflect this. If you've heard Don Juan, if you've heard Till Eulenspiegel, if you've heard Ein Heldenleben, the way he writes for the horn is very heroic, and I would like to argue with people about calling it like standard for great orchestral horn playing, or horn writing. So he's really created just like the whole idea behind the horn being able to be heroic and have broad melodies and still do light, delicate things and be a technical instrument too. So we as horn players love Strauss. We love playing Strauss, and the Strauss Concerto for horn is one of the most standard pieces in the repertoire, and I'm happy to bring it to you now. This will be my last piece for the evening. Again, once I'm finished playing, I will happily answer as many questions and try to respond if anybody has any questions on the side. But I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I'm going to play Strauss's Concerto for you and then hopefully answer some questions and see what else we've got. So, Strauss's Concerto for horn. I'm just going to play the first movement for you. It starts with solo horn, and then I have to kick the orchestra in, so it's kind of funny. Thank you so much for watching. That was Richard Strauss, the Concerto for Horn, the first movement. Those B flats proved to be treacherous for me today too, so it wasn't just from Strauss. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the presentation tonight. There's 2 more on the schedule. One next Thursday, you're going to hear Mando playing the flute at 6 p.m. And then Julie will be introducing the violin at 6 p.m. on the following Thursday. So the next few Thursdays, the Olympia Symphony will have some other introduction to the instruments or some concerts. We hope that you tune in. We really appreciate you being a part of the Olympia Symphony, even though we can't always be there for you right now. With the audience, we are happy to make music for you. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for watching tonight. And I'm gonna go through some of these questions over here, and if I don't answer them in the stream, I'll definitely reply to your comment and answer your question there. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you learned something about the horn. Thank you very, very much. Have a great evening.